Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and thank you, Diana. My name is Andy Gray. I am the director of the North American Primate Sanctuary Alliance, which is a coalition of 8 of the leading primate sanctuaries in the actually in North America, not just the United States and Canada. And yeah, it's wonderful to have you all here today. This is our final discussion about Chimp Crazy now that the series is over and out there. So we can kind of look at it big picture and talk more about all the other Tonkas out there and where they are, what efforts are being made on their behalf, and what we can all do to support getting them to sanctuaries. So with that, I will hand it off to Kate.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kate Deluski. I'm the Assistant Director of Government Affairs at the Animal Welfare Institute, and I'm really happy to be joining you tonight. I'll be chatting a little bit later about the Captive Primate Safety Act, the federal bill that's in Congress right now.
And I think sorry, I'm making you go back a slide, Diana, but we also have Debbie Metzler, who I will let introduce herself as well.
Thanks for having me. I am Debbie Metzler, and I work for the PETA Foundation in our Captive Animal Law Enforcement Department. And I actually know a lot of you from working with chimpanzees. Previously, I worked at Chimpanzee and Human Communication Institute in Ellensburg, Washington, and also Chimpanzee Sanctuary Northwest. So that's my background, and it got me interested in advocacy, specifically chimpanzees used in entertainment. And so that's what led me to what I'm doing now. And I'm happy to share more about the status of those chimpanzees.
Thank you. Thank you, Kate and Debbie. We're really happy to have you with this discussion. And I didn't officially introduce myself. So I'm Diana Goodrich, and I am the co-director at Chimpanzee Sanctuary Northwest. I'll put my slide up, which is a smaller sanctuary in the central part of Washington State. Recognize a lot of names, so welcome. Really glad for people who have joined us through all these discussions. I've said it, I think, every time, but it's been really helpful for me to kind of process Chimp Crazy and learn more myself about how things happened and the issues. So we're really, really happy to have you all here. So I'm going to just go over some basic Zoom stuff. For people who have been at these discussions, you know all of this. So the flow of the evening, we're just going to go over some Zoom stuff. Andy's going to give us a fantastic oh, sorry, that's a recap of episode 3. That's not what we're going to do. We're going to kind of recap overall the docuseries. I do have a couple of poll questions to kind of get the discussion going, and we're also going to have a little bit more PowerPoint with Kate and Debbie jumping in to talk more about some of the specific issues and the information that they're going to share with us. So we are recording this meeting, so just keep that in mind. We're posting these publicly on YouTube, which is great because that means other people can see them even if they're not able to join us tonight. But just be aware of, that that's going to be public. You can turn on subtitles by clicking CC in your meeting controls. We do invite and encourage everyone to identify themselves with their first and last name and their affiliation if that's possible. And you can do that by clicking participants and locating your name and then clicking more and choosing rename. There's also different ways that you can see speakers. I'm not going to go over that. You probably all know that. These discussions have been pretty open overall. Everyone's been super polite. We really appreciate it. So there's a couple of different ways that you can, if you have a question, you can put it right in the chat if you want to do that. I'm going to do my best to keep my eye on that, and I'm sure Andy is as well. You can raise your hand if you want to either say something or type something in the chat, and we will you can unmute yourself. And if you don't want to raise your hand, that's fine too. You can kind of, if there's a lull, you can unmute yourself and say something. And obviously we expect everyone to be respectful. And we haven't had to remove everyone, but we will if anyone is disruptive. So, Chimp Crazy, it seems like it's been a long time since we last met. And so we do want to do a recap, and Andy's going to do that for us, just about the show overall.
Absolutely. And I wanted to mention as well, I meant to mention it earlier, but we had also expected to have Katie Conley from the Humane Society of the United States. She's Vice President of Animal Research Issues and has been very involved with chimps and labs over the years, but she wasn't able to join us tonight. So we're sad she can't be here, but just wanted to mention that as well because we did put it on the invite. So yeah. But with that, happy to jump into the recap. And, I'll keep it fairly high level and brief. But, the main story was Tonka and his kind of harrowing journey from the Missouri Primate Foundation, where he lived alone. He did not live in a group and he did not have access to the outdoors, to Union Ridge Wildlife Center. So we saw kind of the insanity of, all of that and him being kind of secretly taken away and hidden there, and even the bizarre Holiday Inn part where he's, pushed up a stairway. It was very, very bizarre. And then finally to Tanya Haddox's basement, where he lived in a very small space by himself. And then ultimately to Save the Chimps, which is a beautiful sanctuary and also a NAPSA member sanctuary. And he's now thriving there in a large group. So that was kind of the main story arc. And interwoven into that was stories about other chimpanzees that didn't have such happy endings. So there was the very tragic story of Travis, which all of us kind of, I think, in the sanctuary realm have known about since it occurred. But the really fascinating part of that was learning some previously unknown information, including unknown to, sanctuaries and people that were fairly closely involved with the case, such as Sandra Harold getting another chimp, Chance, in partnership with Pam Rosaire, and even bringing him back to Connecticut to her home after Travis died. It's also interwoven with Buck's story. So Buck, who lived in Oregon as a pet, and we got some kind of insights into the multiple failures and oversight that led to his tragic passing. And we also saw Chance's story. Chance was the chimp living with Pam Rosaire and died at a very young age, died at, I believe, 15 years old. And some kind of key highlights throughout the series were this interesting kind of deceptive approach that the filmmakers took. So there was deception everywhere, right? So Tanya Haddox was deceived. Basically Eric Goode wasn't discovered to be the actual filmmaker until very late in the whole filming process. So that was very interesting to see. And there was kind of this proxy director who was the face of the production of the series as it was being filmed. And then we see Eric Goode meeting Tanya and all of that at the end. PETA's work is very much highlighted throughout the series. PETA has been very highly involved in cases with pet chimpanzees and chimpanzees in roadside facilities for many years, and they've facilitated the rescue of many chimpanzees, I believe over 20. So they were involved with all of these cases to try to get these chimps to sanctuaries, and certainly very involved with Tonka's case as well. And we get to see, the whole saga of Eric Goode and his crew learning that, Tanya is planning to have Tonka euthanized, and they go to PETA and give them some really good evidence to get Tonka out. And, they don't overtly talk about the Captive Primate Safety Act in the series, but certainly talk about various laws. So, they take us through some things about the Endangered Species Act, talk about some laws in various states. So they talked a little bit about laws in Connecticut after some incidents with Travis before his death. And at the end, they kind of hint at the Captive Primate Safety Act. They kind of allude to it without calling it out specifically, how there's no federal legislation that bans chimpanzees from living in private homes. So that's kind of the big picture recap. Hopefully it's still somewhat fresh in your memory. I know it's been a couple weeks, but that's the big picture review of it.
Yeah, thank you. That was great. Actually, I did want to say, with PETA's involvement, I've been kind of looking at different comments here and there, like on media articles and the Reddit page, and it's really interesting how people are like, well, I guess I like PETA now, or comments similar to that, like, oh, usually I'm not on PETA's side, but I agree with them in this case. So Andy wanted to share what NAPSA's work is in this realm and other Tonkas that are out there.
Thanks, Diana. So, despite how heavy the series could be at times, and, it was sad and frustrating to watch, despite that, we've actually made a great deal of progress with chimps in the United States. 10, 15 years ago, there were much larger numbers in private homes, in laboratories, in roadside facilities. So, there's a lot to celebrate and a lot to be excited about right now, because there are only about 200, excuse me, chimpanzees that are still need sanctuary right now. So even just 10, 15 years ago, there were over 700 chimps just in labs alone, just to give you a sense of how those numbers have changed. So I'm sorry, I keep misspeaking. NAPSA's Chimpanzees in Need project is a strategic planning and capacity planning project that we are doing in collaboration with many other organizations. So all of the chimpanzee sanctuaries in the country, not just NAPSA member sanctuaries, but other chimpanzee sanctuaries as well as advocacy groups like PETA and Humane Society of the United States, that are doing, work to get chimps into sanctuaries, whether that's through legal efforts or through public pressure. So it's this very collaborative effort. And as far as how many are still out there, there are about 190 chimps in labs. There are about roughly 40 or so in roadside zoos, and a handful of pets, only a few pets left in the country. So what we want to do now is, we know that there's a little over 200 that will eventually need sanctuary placement. At the moment, they're not able to be retired to sanctuary either because the owners are not willing to relinquish them, or the laboratories are not willing to have them transferred. But ultimately, over time, these chimpanzees will very likely need sanctuary placement. So what we want to do now is prepare as much as possible for that, because most of the country's chimpanzee sanctuaries and sanctuaries for primates in general are at capacity. So understanding where there is capacity in the sanctuaries now, what capacity will look like in 5, 10, 15 years, which sanctuaries plan to build out their capacity. So having a sense of where they can go when they are available to be placed in sanctuary, and, creative funding efforts, because funding is a huge factor to getting chimps to sanctuaries. So those are the types of things that we're, strategically planning for now. So that is kind of a rough overview of our Chimps in Need project. And as we mentioned, we had hoped to have Katie Conley here, who is very much the expert on chimps in labs. But just to kind of go through, we're going to go through sort of each area where chimps are currently living and will ultimately, need retirement. And one of them is labs. So when we think about labs, as I mentioned a moment ago, there used to be over 1,000 chimps in labs, and now there's only 190. And for the first time ever, there are more chimps in sanctuaries than there are in laboratories, which is huge. It's really monumental. I think that all of us in this field, even 15 years ago, you know, didn't know if that was even possible. So it's really incredible how far we've come. Currently, the chimps that are still in labs are being held at Alamogordo Primate Facility, New Iberia Research Center, Texas Biomedical Research Institute, MD Anderson Cancer Center, and Emory Primate Research Center, which was formerly known as Yerkes. So you might have heard of Yerkes before. So as you can see on the right here, this is a National Geographic article, and there's been a lot of conversation in recent years about what do we do? You know, now that, you know, the loophole has been closed on the Endangered Species Act that allowed split listing where chimps could be used in things like biomedical research. Now that that loophole has been closed, it effectively ended biomedical research. But there are some labs that want to keep the chimps in place, even though they're not being tested on or participating in research. So one of the biggest legal efforts at the moment is for the Alamogordo chimps at the Alamogordo Primate Facility. So in 2019, the NIH made the decision to not transfer the Alamogordo Primate Facility chimps to Chimp Haven. So per the Chimp Act, those chimps would have gone to Chimp Haven because it's part of the federal sanctuary system, and there is a law related to that, the Chimp Act. However, they made the decision, they said these chimps are too elderly, too fragile, or too sick, so we can't transfer them. In 2021, the HSUS, Humane Society of the United States, Animal Protection New Mexico, and 3 individuals sued the NIH because per the Chimp Act, you know, they should have been going to Chimp Haven, which is the federal chimpanzee sanctuary. In 2022, a federal judge determined that the Chimp Act clearly states that elderly and or sick chimpanzees would enter the federal sanctuary system, and that the NIH's decision to not allow those chimps to be moved was inconsistent with the Chimp Act and its statutory requirement. However, the NIH still refuses to move those chimps. So the situation at the moment is stalled. There's been some efforts going back and forth with the court. For example, you know, the HSUS and others have asked for clearer instructions. The court declined. So a number of organizations are now working together to kind of explore the options of what can be done, but it's been a long legal effort to get this done. And I linked an action alert for the HSUS where you can sign up to help with that, and also a New York Times article that goes far more into depth about this. So that's one type of, you know, legal effort that's happening on behalf of chimps and labs. And the other thing that is also happening at the same time is sanctuary relationships with labs. So there are sanctuaries that are working collaboratively with laboratories to retire chimps. So for example, Project Chimps works with the New Iberia Research Center to you know, have those chimps relocated to Project Chimps over time. So you know, there's a lot going on between all of these different facilities, but hopefully that is a good summary of the big picture pieces that are happening. And lastly, for Emory, I believe there are 18 or 19 chimps at Emory Primate Research Center, and historically they will retire those chimps to zoos, AZA accredited zoos. So it's unlikely that those chimps would be retired to sanctuaries, but they do work with like Indianapolis Zoo, for example, to retire those chimps. So we'll see what happens there.
Thank you. Yeah, and Katie did let us know that if people have questions about what HSUS is doing or kind of any of this information, then she's open to answering them, even though she's not able to be here tonight. Leslie has such a good question in the chat. Why do labs want to keep chimps if they can't test on them? And I really wish Katie was here to answer that, because this is something that we talked about at our recent meeting. The North American Primate Sanctuary Alliance had a workshop, and we came together, like Andy was saying, with other groups to talk about this very issue. And the simple answer is we don't know. It's not clear why labs are wanting to hold on to chimpanzees. Some of the kind of public information about what they say is that chimps are not wanting to be moved. They don't want to move the chimps because they're concerned about them and they have medical issues. And it does seem like there's maybe some economic issues involved because even though it costs money to keep the chimps there, they also are getting funding from the government and can use funding in some loose ways. So it doesn't necessarily all have to go to the chimps that are living at the laboratories. So thank you, Leslie, for that question.
And just to add on to that, another likely issue is job retention. So wanting to keep the jobs that are currently in the laboratories. So, I think one important case to make is that those jobs would transfer, to sanctuaries. So that's one piece of it. And additional side note, I meant to point this out. I linked the Chimp Care Map, which is a tool by Lincoln Park Zoo. It is an absolutely amazing database with an interactive map. And for those of you who haven't seen it before, you can filter out where chimps are living based on if they're in an AZA accredited zoo, a GFAS accredited sanctuary, an unaccredited facility, if they're a pet. So it's an absolutely amazing resource. And I just wanted to mention that because I forgot to.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know, Mary Lee, if you wanted to say anything about the kind of answering Leslie's question about the indirect funds that are given through NIH grants, or if you want to just leave it at your answer in the chat.
Oh, I'll talk. Yeah, so Alamogordo, if they give up their chimps, there's nobody gonna be there anymore. No chimps, no monkeys, no critters. So that might be a question of job loss, but they still at the same time are receiving grants to care for the chimps. So there's the 45% overhead, at least that's what it used to be. With the other two labs, they have monkeys there, so they'll continue in their mission. And I would guess that a chimp caregiver could be absorbed into caring for the monkeys and other critters that are there. So I don't know their motivation except the overhead costs. I think it's really all about finances, and I think it's a lot about saving face.
Yeah.
And another thing that I wanted to add on as well, as far, regarding concern about the chimp's health and condition, Chimp Haven has transported over 500 chimpanzees, including many that were elderly and had medical conditions, over, the last 20 years or so without any incidents. So Save the Chimps as well has transported many elderly chimps. For anyone who knows about their founding, those chimps were originally in New Mexico and they were transported to Florida. And they also successfully relocated many elderly and health compromised chimps. So it certainly can be done, and it's been done many times.
This is Amy from Chimp Haven. I'm sorry I couldn't figure out how to raise my hand. I also put in the chat the costs, a link to the cost. It actually just came out yesterday for the costs at the federal labs. If someone's interested in looking at the different, the finance part of it too.
Thank you so much, Amy. I should have mentioned that because I saw that as well. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, you're muted, Diana.
I'm just talking. Amy, I don't see your comment in the chat. Is it possible you sent it just to one person instead of everyone? I always do that.
I don't see it either.
Oh, yeah, I think I did do that. Let me send it to everybody.
Thank you so much, Amy.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Thank you.
All right. I think we can go to the next slide.
Yeah, so this one is going to be covered by Debbie.
Yeah, so this is related to what, is covered in Chimp Crazy is privately owning chimpanzees. And luckily, there aren't very many chimpanzees still in human homes. Just a couple really. And then there's about over 60 in other roadside zoos and unaccredited facilities. Some places like the Rosaire Zobe chimpanzees, which is, an ex-circus. It's not really a roadside zoo. So it kind of falls in this category of privately owned, but they're also not in a human home. So there's about 60 chimpanzees across 15 facilities. And it still sounds kind of like a staggering number, but in the last couple decades, we've seen roughly 60 or so roadside zoos, trainers, private owners that had chimps and no longer do. And whether that was because they relocated them to a different exhibitor, which they did do a fair amount of, or sometimes their chimpanzee populations passed away, and they just did not get any additionals. Or there's also been a number of rescues. In the last 15 years, there have been 93 chimps who have been rescued by accredited facilities. That is often GFAS sanctuaries, but also accredited zoos have rescued some chimpanzees who were used in entertainment. So that's a really exciting number to see. And I think that a lot of these facilities, they do see the writing on the wall. They know that the days are numbered of people don't want to see chimpanzees on TV anymore. So there's, the use of chimpanzees in Hollywood has ended. They're not used on greeting cards. Those have been pulled from the shelves. So the days of the chimpanzee tea parties, so to speak, is over. And I don't think, people don't generally want to see them in tiny, dingy cages either. So I think that there's definitely a shift towards the end of roadside zoos with chimpanzees. So it's very exciting, and we're really happy to see that trend. Of course, we need space in sanctuaries, and we realize that there is a space issue. And so PETA, about a decade ago, set out to rescue every remaining solitary chimpanzee in a roadside zoo. And we did rescue a number of them. Luckily, there are only a few left who are in complete solitary confinement. So what we're pressuring these facilities to do is to come up with a plan, to work with NAPSA, to work with accredited sanctuaries, and come up with a plan for when space is available. And so the facilities that still have a single chimpanzee are the priority. But we've also identified ones that have particularly alarming conditions or practices that are really bad, such as I think most people are probably familiar with Doc Antle, who was featured in Tiger King, and he uses his chimpanzees for photo ops, which is obviously very stressful and cruel. So that's one facility that we push with those efforts. We do press, we call on the public to send letters and that sort of thing. With the solitary chimpanzees, the one that's probably most like Tonka is, his name is Bo. And he is in a private home in Missouri owned by Aya Katz. And she actually does not have a USDA license. So there's no oversight from the federal government of the conditions that he's kept in. They actually have determined that she needs a license because she's been exploiting him on YouTube. She's been using him and videos of him to try and get money from viewers. And it's really a disaster waiting to happen. All of these videos show Bo, who's over 20 years old, grooming her face. And it's cringeworthy because you're just waiting for the moment when he reacts to something that's, surprises him or stresses him or whatever it may be, as we know has happened before. So it would be deadly for Bo. And so we're really, really pushing Aya Katz to work with the sanctuaries to put Bo in retirement in that way. And then another solitary chimpanzee in a roadside zoo is Limbani. He's at the Zoological Wildlife Foundation. In his early years, they did use him for photo ops, and he's been alone his entire life. So has Bo, actually. He's fairly young still, but this facility, they're very profit driven. they don't prioritize animal welfare, and the owner of the facility also actually should be in prison, but he made a deal with the government to turn state's witness, and he was released. He had been imprisoned for racketeering charges and narcotics issues, and throughout his case, it was revealed that he assisted in the dismemberment and burning of the remains of a DEA agent. He was sentenced to 100 years in prison, but he only served 12. So, but he's running this roadside zoo in Florida. It's very disturbing, and obviously Limbani needs a better environment. And then the other one who's all alone that we just recently learned is all alone is George at the West Coast Game Park. So I had kind of suspected for a while that he was maybe alone, because PETA regularly gets complaints from the public about facilities, and for several months we'd only seen George. His partner was Daphne. She was older. She was geriatric, and I suspected, she had passed away. But the USDA's inspection report in April said there were 2 chimpanzees. So I was kind of like, okay, I guess she's just been hiding or inside or whatever. And then their most recent inspection report, which actually just came out, and PETA we do plan on publicizing that, so stay tuned for more. It's full of a number of issues, and it describes how Daphne died in November of last year. So that tells you a little bit about how thorough those USDA inventories are. For them to have in April said there were 2 chimpanzees, but then a few months later describe how she died 6 months before that. So it's just kind of classic for those numbers to be very unreliable. But sometimes it's the only information that we can gather. So that's what we have to sort of go by. So yeah, what actions being taken is doing the public pressure, doing press whenever we can. But nothing's off the table. PETA has sued these facilities. Obviously that was Chimp Crazy was a lot about one of those lawsuits. And I think that some of these facilities know that they're on red alert. They know that it's possible that they could be next. And so hopefully that additional pressure, the thought of that maybe looming, will push them towards contacting NAPSA, contacting accredited sanctuaries, and trying to work towards building a plan for retiring their chimpanzees. And so how other people can help with these efforts, we actually do have a page. I can link to it in the chat. And also, if there have been questions, I have missed them because I don't have the Zoom window open. So
there was just one question, but it's related to labs.
Oh, okay. So I'll paste this link. So this highlights the 8 facilities that we are focused on right now. The ones that have chimpanzees in solitary confinement, and also the ones that have them in some of the worst conditions that are out there right now. And so if you go through there, you can send an email to these people asking them to do what's right. And we know that these emails work. When I worked at CSNW, we used a similar advocacy tactic, and it gets their attention. It really does. And so the more people who sign these letters, who send in their own personalized letters, the more it kind of gets under their skin, and it makes them realize that we're not going away. And I think that something that is interesting, because Tanya Haddix actually in the series talks about PETA being relentless, and she's using it as sort of a negative feature, but we actually are very proud of the fact that we don't go away, so I think that it's a hallmark of our organization, and why PETA is the most effective animal rights group in the world and has so many successes, because we don't give up. And so I think when these facilities realize that they're in the crosshairs, it's only a matter of time before they do the right thing and get PETA off their back. So yeah, if there's any questions, just shout out.
Yeah, thank you. as we're waiting for maybe questions to come in, there was one thing that Andy and I were talking about that I don't want to put you on the spot or anything, but this like contacting these folks on social media, like particularly, you know, places like Zoological Foundation, does that just help them in some ways? This is my dilemma always, is like, or like Tanya Haddix, I know, has like a podcast now, and she has an Instagram page, and you know, she's really trying to get as much out of her new publicity and star status as possible. And I feel like, well, if I'm like constantly looking at her page or even, you know, commenting on Instagram, or then it kind of feeds the algorithm of social media. So what do you think about that dilemma?
Yeah, that's true. I've recommended when people see you know, unfavorable imagery of chimpanzees, like if Doc Antle is sharing a video of one of the chimpanzees wearing clothes and diapers and doing humanistic things, to talk to the person who shared it rather than like interact with the video too much, because again, it does, I think, help that algorithm. So that's what I've recommended. Of course, when we're asking people to call on these facilities to do what's right, you are going to be commenting on their page and on their content. The only advantage, I think, is that then people who are their fans will see those comments as well. So there is that advantage. And also, they don't like getting 20,000 comments. It does bother them. So agitating them is definitely the goal, getting their attention. But I totally get that dilemma as well. And it's tough because I honestly don't know enough about how those algorithms work to know whether we're actually helping them get more attention that doesn't work in our favor. And yeah, with these like documentaries, you know, Doc Antle's crew, he has his account, Myrtle Beach Safari's account, his children have accounts. They have an account for the chimpanzees. They have so many accounts and they all have millions of followers. And it's from the Tiger King mania, essentially. And so even leaving comments on those pages, it's unlikely that they will see it, really, because they have so many people leaving comments. So it's hard to say whether it helps or hinders, but certainly sending them emails does get under their skin. So that's usually what I tell people.
Yeah. Well, I think there are a couple of great questions in the chat, and I think we can save them and talk about other primates right now.
Yes, thank you, Diana. And Debbie, I might have you jump in one or two spots. Though being mindful of time, I am going to try to get through the slide quickly because we want to have time for Kate to talk about the Captive Primate Safety Act and time for discussion. So I'll try to do this quickly. So, you know, we've been talking all about chimps, but what about other primate species? So when we think about the numbers in laboratories, entertainment, roadside zoos, and in private ownership, the reality is that we truly do not know the true scale of the real numbers for most of these areas, particularly entertainment and private ownership. So there has been an estimate that floats around that you might see sometimes that there are 15,000 non-human primate pets in the country, but there's no way to verify that. There's no data. There's nowhere to actually pull that information. And each state has varying laws. Many of them are quite lax. So no one's tracking it. Same for entertainment. It's very difficult to find all of them. And, you know, I know that PETA has done a lot of work to find some of these, you know, primates and other exotic animals as well. So, you know, there's a general sense that there's large numbers, but it's hard to know the exact numbers. As for laboratories, Debbie and I realized we have some slightly conflicting numbers, and I actually wondered, since Amy Foltz is on this call, if she might be able to confirm. I don't mean to put you on the spot, Amy, But my understanding from the most recent report in 2021 was that there were over 235,000. And the reason I ask you is because Erica Fleury mentioned to me that you're working on something where that number was relevant. So do you know if that is correct or if it's a lower number than that?
I'm sorry, the number of what are we
Of
talking about,
monkeys in
Andy?
laboratories. It's over 250,000, I believe. Is that
Yeah,
accurate? Yeah,
yeah, that's accurate. And of course, with the monkeys, they continue to bring them in, especially monkeys that are not considered endangered species. They can still be imported into the US for
right.
research as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Amy. I thought you might know that just because Erica had mentioned to me recently, specifically in regard to that number. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a very alarming number. I mean, over 250,000 is absolutely enormous. And that's just for laboratories. So it's quite concerning. You know, if you look at some of these documents that we've shared in previous discussions, you know, we've shared incident reports from PETA, from Board Free Foundation. There are many safety incidents that come up with smaller primates. It's not just chimps that can and will bite and cause problems. And, you know, I think all of us who have worked in sanctuaries before know former pets and know the condition that they've come into the sanctuary in. They know what their lives were like before they came to the sanctuary. And the reality is that primates are incredibly complex animals and their needs simply can't be met in a human home. So um, we want to do things to help them, right? So shortly, we're going to have Kate Delusky talk more about the Captive Primate Safety Act, which is very important. Um, so I'll let her talk about that. It's been around for a long time, but we haven't been able to get it passed yet. So we're hoping that this is its moment. But in addition to that, some things that would be helpful for these other primates is federal legislation to provide funding for retirement from laboratories. So there is some precedence for this with the Chimp Act. And the Chimp Act, as we were talking about earlier, you know, allows a system not only for chimpanzees to be retired to Chimp Haven, which is the National Chimpanzee Sanctuary or the federal sanctuary system. There's also a certain amount of funding set aside. So 75% of their lifetime care costs are set aside by the federal government, but there's nothing like this for other primate species. And of course, with over 253,000 of them, even if all of that research stopped today, there wouldn't be room for them in sanctuaries. So another thing that helped chimps was a moratorium on breeding for quite a few years before research on chimps stopped. So those are the kinds of things that, at least in my opinion, would ultimately really benefit other primate species in labs. And then in entertainment, tougher restrictions. You know, we see these days a lot more monkeys in entertainment than chimps or orangutans. You know, Bad Monkey was a series that recently came out that uses a capuchin monkey. There was a macaque in House of the Dragon. We see them pop up in commercials. You know, it's becoming a little less popular than it was maybe 15, 20 years ago, but it's still happening. And we really need some tougher restrictions on that. So with that, I think we can hand it off to Kate. I think the next slide. Yes, we have Kate to talk more about the Captive Primate Safety Act and its history and where it stands now and what we can do to support it.
Thanks, Andy. Hi, everyone. So just quickly, a little information about how I'm involved with this bill. I am a federal lobbyist based in DC. I've been lobbying for 11 years now, and I have been lobbying on the Captive Primate Safety Act for 11 years now. So it's definitely time to pass this bill. It has been around for quite a while. And so I want to give you a little bit of information about what the bill does, where it stands now, and what the next steps and the strategy on this bill are. So this bill is currently introduced in both the House and the Senate in Congress. And what it would do is very simple. It would prohibit the sale, breeding, and possession of non-human primates for the pet trade. And it is laser focused on the pet trade. So it would not have any effect on zoos or circuses or research laboratories or sanctuaries or universities. And that's not because we don't care about the primates that are in those facilities or those situations, but it is simply because to get bills passed in Congress, they need to be pretty focused and pretty specific. So what we are tackling with this bill is the pet trade. And current owners of pet primates would be grandfathered in under this bill, which means that they could keep the primates that they currently have. They just couldn't acquire anymore or breed anymore. And part of that is for practical reasons. It's impossible to go around and seize animals from everybody who has them. And part of that is for very obvious sanctuary space reasons. There's just not enough places to put all the primates that are currently in private hands. So essentially this bill would say no more. From here on out, no one else can acquire any additional pet primates. And so where this bill stands right now is that even though it is active in Congress, it will have to be reintroduced in a few months. And the reason for that is that Congress runs in a 2-year session. And we are approaching the end of this 2-year Congress. It will be at the end of December, that's it, it's done. All the bills that are active right now are no longer in existence. And the new Congress will start in January, and then we will have 2 years to get this bill reintroduced and to pass it. It almost certainly will not pass by the end of this year. And, you know, for anyone who is following any political news, I don't think it'll be a surprise to you, given how dysfunctional Congress is and the fact that they can't get anything passed right now. And so we're really using these next few months ahead of its reintroduction to gain as much momentum and support for this bill as possible so that we can hit the ground running next year. And like I mentioned, I've been working on this bill for a long time, and I feel like it has some really unique momentum right now. I have never felt as hopeful about this bill as I do in this moment leading into the next Congress. And there are a few reasons for this. One of which is certainly Chimp Crazy. I worked on the Big Cat Public Safety Act up until it passed, and it was given a big boost from the visibility of Tiger King. I'm not saying Tiger King was a great representation of the plight of big cats in this country, but it did create visibility. And we are seeing Chimp Crazy do the same thing. We're seeing people talk about it. We're seeing people as they get caught up in all the salaciousness of Tanya Haddock's. This problem of pet primates has become part of the national conversation in the past couple of months in the way that it really wasn't before. And that is something that is so helpful in terms of our efforts to educate on this bill and get folks on the Hill and grassroots people interested. We're actually planning a screening of a piece of Chimp Crazy on the Hill for next month. So that's another opportunity for us to educate staffers and members of Congress on the bill. In addition, we have well over 100 endorsements of the bill right now by organizations. This includes a lot of zoos, sanctuaries, law enforcement organizations, primatology organizations, animal welfare groups. There's just this huge groundswell of support at the moment that makes me really excited. And finally, the passage of the Big Cat Public Safety Act actually laid the groundwork for this because that was a very similar bill, and we learned a lot of lessons. And you know, people in Congress learned a lot about the pet trade, the exotic pet trade in general. And I do genuinely believe that that creates the foundation for us to really be able to launch the Captive Primate Safety Act and be successful with it next Congress. So I haven't been able to follow the chat very closely, but I have seen some questions about how folks can get involved. And so I want to touch on that. Diana, thank you for sharing the link to the AWI website. You can read about the bill there, and then there's also a take action button. So you as a private citizen, please go and fill that out and send a letter to your members of Congress. That is the number one most important thing that they be hearing from constituents. That's what makes them care about this. Please share that link far and wide. Get everybody you can to write to their members of Congress. Additionally, if you represent a group, a sanctuary, organization, and you haven't already endorsed this bill, please get in touch with me or with Andy, who can pass it along to me, because we would love your endorsement. We're looking for as much support as possible. And then additionally, if you are an organization, a sanctuary, and you have the capacity to add information about this bill to your website, to send out emails to your supporters, to post on social media about it, all with the same message of please write to your federal lawmakers and tell them that you support this bill. That would be so helpful. I'm happy to share template language. Actually, I'm going to be sending some to Andy so she can also just distribute it, and to provide any guidance there. But you know, any way that you can continue to share information about this on your platforms. And then finally, as we continue this lobbying process, I will likely be reaching out to folks, to organizations who have endorsed the bill, based on the state that you live in, for when we're targeting legislators from that particular state, asking maybe for special outreach, for ways that we need you to engage in a particular way at a particular moment. And so I would just ask that, knowing that bandwidth is tight, knowing truly how demanding sanctuary work is, that if possible, just to be open to those asks, and let me know if you are able to help with them if I do reach out. So that's all I have, but I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Kate. This is great. And, you know, one of the like really amazing things to me about the Captive Primate Safety Act is that it's been around since 2007, since before the Travis incident. And there's been so much hard work over the years to try to pass this bill, as you know. So it's really exciting to see that there's so much hope and so much positivity around it right now, because everyone certainly put the work in. Yeah, we did have one question in the chat. How will the government regulate current primate owners? Would there be anything like a permit system or anything like that?
It's a great question. It would function exactly the same way that it does for big cats under the Big Cat Public Safety Act, where current owners would have to register the primates that they currently have with the Fish and Wildlife Service, which is the government body that would be implementing this law. And this would mean that the Fish and Wildlife Service would then have a list of the folks who are grandfathered in. And they would only have a certain window in which to register. And so after that, if they hadn't registered, essentially they would be illegally owning primates.
Gotcha. And just that information alone would be so helpful, I think, for the sanctuary world, because over time, you know, pet primates do end up in sanctuaries. You know, sanctuaries are contacted all the time. I'm kind of a point person for many sanctuaries, and I get requests all the time for pet primates to be placed in sanctuaries. So even just having a sense of the scale would be so useful for all of us. Someone asked, would it be a one-time registration or will they check in on them?
It would be a one-time registration. Fish and Wildlife Service isn't given any sort of inspection authority under this bill, nor do they have the capacity to do that.
Gotcha. Great. All right. Well, I know that we've gone pretty long, and I hope that people can stay for discussion. But you know, if you need to jump off, of course, we understand. But we do still have lots to discuss. We have discussion questions we can go through, and as we do so, we very much encourage you to get on screen if you would like. Of course, you don't have to, but we love to see your faces, and yeah, we just love to hear from you. So how do you want to do it, Diana?
I was just gonna, oh, sorry. I was just
Oh,
gonna
go
say
ahead.
to answer that question, but Diana did. I believe Kate probably knows this answer better than I do, but this bill would not in any way affect any USDA licensee.
Yeah, I think it's a really important distinction to draw that USDA licensees, the exhibitors, are nothing about their situation has changed in any way by this bill. And so USDA, yes, would absolutely continue inspecting zoos and other exhibitors. And they don't currently regulate exotic pets, nor would they. And just answering the next question that came in, there are no additional requirements for the owners that are grandfathered in. Again, there's really no good enforcement mechanism there, nor any capacity for that. What we're trying to do is end the pet primate trade moving forward. And so, you know, we want this to be sort of the line in the sand where there are no further future pet primates coming into anybody's homes.
So breeding would not be allowed.
Right,
Would be
breeding would not
illegal,
be
but
allowed.
but any kind of, you know, sterilization or spay neuter would not be
Right,
required.
exactly. Breeding would be illegal. No language about spaying or neutering.
Right. Gotcha. Thanks, Kate.
Mhm.
And Debbie, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for answering those questions. Well, I think what we could do is I can launch a poll. So I think one kind of easy question, maybe. I don't know. It's not actually a very easy question. Would you recommend Chimp Crazy to others to watch? And I added, I was going to leave it at yes or no, but I was thinking about myself and I added, it kind of depends on who it is. I was talking to somebody today and she was asking me if she should watch it. And I thought, no, probably not. I think, I mean, there's some really, really tough footage in there and it kind of stays with you. And I think if people are going to support the Captive Primate Safety Act anyway and kind of know the stories, it's really not that necessary to watch the program. Although I know in previous discussions we've had people like Patty Reagan, who has like a wealth of knowledge about the history of primate or chimpanzee and orangutan ownership, and she learned new things in it. So it's helpful to, I think, people who are getting questions about it from the general public, for sure, like people who work in sanctuaries, to watch it if you're able to. So
I also like what you said in the beginning, that it does get people to realize that they actually do like PETA.
yeah, well, it's just a different view of PETA than I think a lot of people have.
Right.
Because PETA is such a large organization doing so many different things, and I think people think of them in just a very specific way, and it shows just some of the other work that y'all are doing. So this
And
is super interesting. Oh, go
sorry,
ahead.
Diana, sorry to cut you off. I just want to say, I also, you know, so many people I know have no idea that PETA has anything to do with chimps. Even people who are in kind of the animal welfare world. So I'm really grateful that that work is being highlighted because so many people just don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. So can you all see the results of the poll?
Mhm.
Yeah. So pretty interesting. A lot of people kind of agreed with me. It kind of depends on who it is that you're talking to, but the majority of people would recommend other people watch it. And then I think I will, let's see if I can figure out how to close this, launch a different poll.
While you're doing that, I'll answer a question in the chat. So someone is asking what is considered a qualified sanctuary, and specifically asking what PETA considers that. But I think, you know, as the representative of NAPSA, I can answer, and Debbie, you can chime in if you would like. But there are some factors that are considered very important for what's a legitimate sanctuary. So NAPSA, for example, in order to be a NAPSA member sanctuary, You have to have GFAS accreditation, which is accreditation by the Global Federation of Animal Sanctuaries. You have to have a USDA license in good standing. And you have to agree to and not participate in certain activities. So that includes breeding, selling animals, using them kind of as photo props. We even have our member sanctuaries adhere to the IUCN photo guidelines for responsible imagery of primates. And there are some very specific guidelines about how humans can be in pictures in proximity to primates, because there's strong research that shows that seeing chimps either being cuddled or being held or being interacted with in a way that is not professional and inappropriate leads people to believe that they are not endangered. So those are very important requirements for NAPSA.
And that they make good pets.
Yes, and it promotes the idea that they make good pets, which NAPSA is, of course, strongly opposed to, as is GFAST and as are AZA accredited zoos as well. So those are kind of the main factors for a legitimate sanctuary. I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Debbie.
No, that's really it. Meeting the standards of the Global Federation of Animal Sanctuaries is kind of just checks the box that PETA is looking at specifically. It is possible to have, follow those reputable practices without having gone through the accreditation process. And so there are times, I don't believe related to primates, but other wild animals where we may vet a sanctuary before placing an animal there. They may not actually have that accreditation yet. But that is usually that's the gold standard. And so that's what we usually recommend when people want to know what's a good sanctuary.
Thanks, Debbie.
Yeah, and I did just launch another poll. Just thinking about the comparison with Tiger King, obviously it was made by the same group of people, particularly Eric Good. Do you think it's as big or as influential as Tiger King, which came out in a very unique period of time with the beginning of the pandemic when people were maybe had more free time to watch TV than they do now? And do you think it's a good or a bad thing? Hopefully I'll be able to share this one, the answers to it, because I can't see them coming in because it's a short answer one. So I'm going to let that go for a little while for people to think about that. And in the meantime, there was a comment from Melissa in the chat just saying that she does not think that anyone should own a chimp. That's great. But that she doesn't think that chimps and smaller primates should be kind of put in the same category, which is interesting. I can kind of understand why you might think that. I personally have also cared for monkeys that were former pets, capuchin monkeys and macaque. And from my experience with that, there's not a lot of difference. Certainly chimpanzees are capable of more violence and capable of kind of more harm to humans. Although there are a lot of injuries from smaller primates. And there's the risk of disease transmission, of course, with macaques in particular. But just from their perspective, from the, what does this individual need and who are they as a species, and are we capable of giving that to them in a pet environment? I would say it's the same to me with chimps and smaller primates and really any exotic animal, because they're not domesticated. They weren't evolved to live in our homes. And so there's no way you can, I obviously run a sanctuary and think that we do a decent job of taking care of chimpanzees, and we try to give them as much as we possibly can. But I recognize that it's a very, very limited life to live a life in captivity when you were born a wild animal. And it breaks my heart every day, really, just thinking about it. I love the chimpanzees here, and I feel so honored to be able to be a part of their lives, but I wish I wasn't in this position. I wish that they had never been either captured or bred to live a captive life, because it's not who they are. They should be in the wild, and they should be able to express all of the things that they evolved to express as wild animals.
I totally agree with all of that. And I'll just also add that, you know, when primates are kept as pets, they're usually torn from their mothers within days or weeks, sometimes maybe even hours. And that's traumatic for the mothers. It's traumatic for the infants, and they can be, you know, they can suffer for the rest of their lives because of that. So we have to consider the individual and what's best for them. And I just don't think it matters what species you are.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I'll add on to that as well that I did my master's research on abnormal behaviors in primates from the pet trade. This was in Indonesia. It was slow lorises, but based on that, research that I was involved in and my experiences with other primates who lived as pets before coming to the sanctuaries that I later worked at, you see a lot of the same problems that you do in former pet chimps as you do in many other species, or really all other species of primates. So partially because of that early maternal separation, and then other factors as well, like limited space to travel and brachiate, or whatever the species specific behaviors are, lead to really similar issues across species. So whether that's stereotypical abnormal behaviors, or difficulties in being incorporated into large groups, things like that. It's really, really similar across even smaller primates like prosimians, slow lorises, lemurs. So yes, and I see Amy, pointing out that they're social animals, and typically kept alone or in very small groups when they're pets. So a good point as well.
Yeah, and I think I may have mentioned this in a previous call, but it's in bringing it back to Chimp Crazy, the way that Tanya Haddix talked about how Tonka was a humanzee, just because he was taken out of, or he was never given the opportunity to live kind of a life of a chimpanzee, and was raised by humans. In her view, I guess what she was saying is he became part human. And we often talk about that here as being in this cultural limbo where the chimpanzee, and I think this would be exactly the same for any other primate, particular, social primates, like Amy says, if you are being raised by a different species, humans are a different species than other primates, you don't grow up with the culture that you evolved to be in. And it's very confusing. And they're not able to live as humans, so they're not able to adopt our culture, and yet they don't have the culture that they were evolved to live. So it's really tragic. So I am going to end this poll. We just have 9 answers. Let's see if we can you see answers?
It doesn't show answers. It just says 100% answered.
Yeah, it does. And then it shows like my answer that I gave. So I don't know if everyone else can see like what they put in.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm gonna just stop screen sharing for a second, and I have a link that I can view. So
Melissa's question about what will this law mean for social media influencers that make their income from primates. So the USDA has determined that if they're monetizing those social media videos, like what Aya Katz does with Bo, that does require a USDA license. So if they don't get a USDA license and they are engaging in that regulated activity, then they are exhibiting illegally, but most of them will have a chance to get a license, and we'll go ahead and do that, and then they wouldn't be subjected to the requirements of the Captive Primate Safety Act.
And then, sorry, Diana, I know you're about to show something, but I'll also quickly answer Audra's question. Do you feel like we will ever be able to close the borders to stop them from being smuggled in? Otherwise, they will always be here and need homes. It's a really interesting question. That is particularly a big problem with spider monkeys. They're being smuggled across the border. And really, I think we don't even know the true scale of it, but it's alarming. And someone who I was actually just thinking would have been so great as a guest on these discussions is someone named Mandy Fisher, who leads the Wildlife Confiscation Network. And they do really great work with confiscating these animals. And I know she could answer that question so much better than I could. But there is a great deal of work going into addressing that, including like genetic testing and testing even like feces to see like, okay, does this primate that we've confiscated have a wild diet, or, do they have a clearly human diet, to kind of help determine like where are these primates coming from, and what evidence can we use to understand this. And yeah, but it's a big concern, and I think we need more awareness. And kind of going back to, we mentioned that previously, that there's research that shows, if you see primates on TV and in movies and in commercials, it can lead to the misperception that they're not endangered, and spider monkeys are endangered. So it's important to have increased awareness. And the Wildlife Confiscation Network is actually a part of AZA. It's part of the American Zoological Association. So it's really great that they are using their resources to kind of step in and address this issue, because they are, they have the funding and the people to really help address it.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So to share some of the answers of the poll, do you think the series is as big or as influential as Tiger King? And is that a good or a bad thing? So some interesting kind of international perspectives. Mary Lee said that Chimp Crazy doesn't seem to be on the same level of buzz as Tiger King was, and outreach that she's done in Canada, people really haven't heard of it. And then somebody else, April, said that she doesn't think it's as big as Tiger King because her primate friends in the UK didn't know anything about Chimp Crazy until she told them about it. So those are kind of interesting perspectives. And also, in my capacity as a zoo docent, I have not had anywhere near as many people mention Chimp Crazy as mentioned, and still mention Tiger King. And Sandy Alloway is wondering, she did not watch Tiger King and is wondering if she should. So that's a great question.
It depends, doesn't it?
It depends.
Yes, you should
I would
watch.
say yes, but keep in
Yes.
mind that it's salacious.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And did you want to share your answer to the question, Debbie? I thought yours was interesting too.
I don't remember what I said.
Well, you said it's not as big, but it's better that it hasn't been as sensationalized as Tiger King.
Yeah.
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 Because I mean, even when Tiger King came out, there was immediately like all these Halloween costumes to be Joe Exotic, and he was portrayed as like a folk hero, and meanwhile Carol Baskin was that B word Carol Baskin, and that's how she was being portrayed when she's literally had been the victim of murder for hire. So it just was a skewed, I think, view.
Yeah. Yeah. Cece said yes, that she does think Chimp Crazy is as big, and it's kind of a formula that they have now, and it really shows that what they're looking for is a personality, and that the animals in the stories are kind of secondary to that. Yeah,
I agree. It could be a difference between Netflix and HBO, and it also could be a difference in timing. Like Diana said, during the pandemic, and it was the very beginning of lockdowns. So it spread like, people were home watching, binging TV. So I think the timing also had a difference.
Yeah.
Diana and I were talking earlier about the kind of, you put it, we didn't use this term, you put it very well, the folk hero aspect of Joe Exotic. And in a way, I think that Joe Exotic kind of makes a better folk hero, maybe, than Tanya
Yeah.
Haddix, you know, and perhaps a more interesting, or just for whatever reason, um, you know, yeah, it's kind of
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah.
And I can't remember, I was listening to something that Eric Good was being interviewed on, and he was talking about how they had, I think, a year or more of talking to primate owners, and they have all this footage from that period, and it's like they were just like waiting for the right character, basically.
Mm,
They met Tanya, she was the right character.
she was it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think people just tend to feel bad for Joe Exotic in ways that they don't feel bad for Tanya.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or maybe even find him like funnier and
Yeah.
like, you know, yeah.
Right. So I know I'm aware it's like 6:20, but if people still want to stay on, I know we haven't actually lost a lot of people, so I guess that means they're interested in the discussion. So is there another question you wanted to take on, Andy?
Yeah, I actually wanted to answer Audra's question in the chat. So if that's okay, she mentioned that if spider monkeys are endangered and breeding is stopped, will they become extinct? And I just wanted to stress that that is not the case. So, you know, even, you know, AZA zoos kind of have these last stronghold kind of populations. That's the idea, right? Is that, you know, the AZA accredited facilities, they have stud books, you know, they breed them in a very careful way to have kind of a, I'm forgetting the term, it's like on the tip of my tongue, like a safety net.
Species survival programs.
Yeah, there's another term that's just
Mm.
escaping me at the moment, but yes, it's the species survival program. However, you know, that program is highly successful in species, for example, like California condors. But the more cognitively complex the animal, the more difficult that becomes. So even these experts who are very, very carefully breeding them would have an extremely difficult time reintroducing spider monkeys back into their native habitat in their range countries for a many number of reasons. You know, it's very challenging to raise a primate and, you know, do so in a way that they, you know, even in the zoo community, I've noticed they've called it imprinting, like even specifically with spider monkeys, that they will imprint on human beings. And this is a major problem, you know, as far as if a primate is to encounter a hunter or a poacher and they don't know to be afraid of a human. Another major issue is that there's no place to reintroduce them. So as their habitats are shrinking, there aren't necessarily strongly protected areas where they could be reintroduced. So that's why it's really, really crucial to protect wild populations and to make sure the smuggling stops and the poaching stops, and that we can conserve these lands where they can continue to thrive. Because you know, any kind of like last resort reintroduction program would be extremely challenging, if not impossible. And I don't know if anyone else wanted to add on to that, but I just wanted to address that question.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's well said. With chimpanzees, which obviously I know a little bit more about, they, even in range countries where there are sanctuaries, you know, where the chimpanzees live in the wild, it's very, very challenging to find like kind of good candidates for reintroduction, because anytime that they've been raised by humans, like I said, they've lost their culture, and a lot of even some instinctual behaviors that you would think would carry on are damaged by not being able to grow up in a natural environment.
No.
So what other questions did you want to cover, Andy, or was there anything specific here?
Let's see. A good one might be, what are your thoughts on the deceptive tactics that the filmmakers use, like the proxy director angle? I would love to hear people's thoughts on that. And please feel free to, you don't have to raise your hand or anything. You can just unmute yourself if you feel like sharing.
There was so Eric Good was interviewed on Joe Rogan, and I did not listen to the whole thing, but I saw a clip of it, and he was saying that he felt, he wasn't saying well, basically he said if Tanya Haddix had known all along that he was behind the filming, then she still would have agreed to it. Maybe. But that was certainly kind of the biggest like revealed deception was that I mean, he wasn't upfront about who he was and kind of the idea behind the documentary. So does anyone else have thoughts about that, and does it affect how we view the series?
My personal feeling is that it does make it harder for maybe some of the truths to be exposed, because people will be even less trusting of filmmakers when they learn that something like this happened. But I do suspect that Tanya Haddix just wanted to tell her story. So I think that she probably would have participated eventually if they you know, checked in with her often enough. But yeah, it's interesting. I thought it was interesting that they did like interview a investigative journalist, I believe, at one point, to get his take on it, because it has a potential domino effect for like, what does this mean if you are a journalist and you're trying to get answers to things and so yeah. The other ethical question with regard to the filmmakers is how people feel about how long they waited before they told PETA about the illegal activity.
Right.
That's something I've heard some mixed thoughts on too.
And I don't know if everyone is aware of this, but even like the sanctuaries that were contacted, so like Save the Chimps, for example, they were contacted by the proxy director. So the proxy director was, the face of the series to everyone, not just Tanya Haddix, which I think is relevant to this question for sure. And I think especially since, sorry, one more thing, that a lot of sanctuaries I think would be nervous to participate in a Tiger King style documentary. So, and then that's the reason, right? That they were deceptive. So,
yeah, we actually just PETA had just gotten an inquiry from someone who's interested in speaking with the preserve that took all of the ringling elephants, and it is AZA accredited, but it's not open to the public in a typical way. And they wanted, and they're claiming that they want to talk about how this is a good life for them now, but they came to us because they're wondering if we can make the connection, and frankly we can't. We're not in touch with them either. But they're wondering, they're like, what do they have to hide? And it's like, well, they probably don't want to be putting themselves at risk of potentially some negative outlook. And I'm sorry, I think I just turned purple. I don't know if everyone else is seeing that.
Yeah,
that's very strange.
I don't know why that happened. It was not on purpose, but anyway, my point is just that it's I think from every angle it's hard to thanks, Riley. It's hard to be trusting when people want to come and film. So because of the types of portrayals that have happened in the popular media.
Yeah, for sure. I'm kind of interested in this other question. Are there other equally effective ways as a sensational TV series to shine a light on the issues? Yeah, I mean, I think this is partly why PETA has the reputation that it sometimes has as being crazy and sensational, because they've found as an organization that it takes a lot to break through. And doing something maybe a little controversial actually allows the message to get out, which is, I think, the whole idea behind this documentary. And it's kind of frustrating, you know, as a sanctuary, realizing that, you know, you can just do your thing, but you're not necessarily gonna get a lot of attention, because controversy is what drives everything, especially with social media like that. I think the algorithm lives for controversy. So yeah, does anyone have ideas on other effective ways to shine a light on the issues besides being, yeah,
I just want to second what you're saying, Diana, that when our cohort of lobbyists who work on the Captive Primate Safety Act first heard that this series was coming out, before we even really had any details about what was in it, we absolutely jumped for joy, because we can spend all of our time carefully, you know, collecting facts and figures and telling stories and trying to make the case using sort of the tools that all of us have at our disposal every day as an animal welfare sanctuary community. And those things simply do not capture the imagination of people to the extent that something sensational and something media focused, the way Tiger King or Chimp Crazy is, does. And so while I would not consider myself entirely like-minded, perhaps, with the filmmakers who have made these shows, I think that their shows have played this incredibly important role that none of us were able to play. And, you know, for that, I think it's worth being grateful for there being a variety of approaches on something like this.
Yeah. Yeah. Somebody that we know that had been an animal activist for years kind of said, we can't, and JB just said this today, we can't all be on second base. So it's like we're a team and we play different roles, and that's how we win, as you know, how we're effective is people approaching things in different ways. Yeah. So there are more questions about the bill itself. I know there was one that I can probably answer pretty quickly, just about smuggling and poaching. And like you were saying, Kate, the bill is very narrowly focused on current or on in-country, I guess, ownership of primates, and as far as I know, it doesn't touch those issues.
Yeah, so I'm happy to sort of answer a couple of these questions here. Currently, punishments for smuggling animals into the country, those would largely fall under other sections of the Lacey Act and under the Endangered Species Act, depending on the species and the situation. And that can range from fines to jail time. And there are active court cases involving people who have tried to smuggle species across the border for the purpose of the pet trade. And the new bill would increase those punishments potentially for people who are trying to do that with primates for the pet trade. It is already illegal to bring primates into this country for the purpose of the pet trade. That has been law for a long time, but this sort of adds another layer of protection, and it does add a new set of penalties there. And then, sorry, just skipping down to the next question. Since the bill doesn't actually mention anything about current primate owners, there's a lot of concern. Not the very best. So the bill, if you're reading the text of the bill itself, it is a little bit hard to decipher. This is true for even the staffers that we work with on the Hill. And the reason for this is that it is amending the section of the Lacey Act that was actually created by the Big Cat Public Safety Act. So the bill doesn't read as this like nice, neat, standalone statute all by itself. It says we're adding some wording here and there to something that already exists in law, basically getting it to cover primates in addition to big cats. And so that section of the Lacey Act already has that language exempting, grandfathering in current big cat owners from the Big Cat Public Safety Act. And the way the Captive Primate Safety Act amends that section means that the same would be true under this new law for current pet primate owners. So current primate owners are absolutely grandfathered in under the Captive Primate Safety Act. It's just, you have to dive a little bit into the text in order to glean that.
Yeah, I wonder if you can, so the next question is just wondering how the agencies are going to be able to keep up with new regulations because they're kind of struggling currently. How do you have any insight into how the Big Cat Safety Act has changed things?
Yeah, so the Big Cat Public Safety Act, as well as the Captive Primate Safety Act, when it passes, those are under the jurisdiction of Fish and Wildlife Service. That is an entirely separate agency from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service under USDA, which is the one that enforces the Animal Welfare Act, which is the one that licenses exhibitors, which is the one, as Debbie discussed earlier, certainly does struggle to do the bare minimum in terms of inspecting and keeping up with animal welfare standards at exhibitor facilities.
Or even
so,
counting the number of chimps when there's only 2 total.
Yes, exactly. Criticism of USDA's enforcement of the Animal Welfare Act, absolutely warranted. Fortunately, the Captive Primate Safety Act falls under an entirely different agency, and the Fish and Wildlife Service has actually done a fantastic job so far of enforcing the Big Cat Public Safety Act. They've been incredibly proactive. They have been incredibly collaborative with all the stakeholders. They have been working to put in place some really strong regulations that really follow the letter of the statute. And, you know, they have also been proactive about requesting from Congress the funding that they need in order to carry this out. So I really speak highly of what they've been doing for the Big Cats law. And because the Captive Primate Safety Act would essentially be more of the same enforcement activities, I am very confident that they would be able to carry that out effectively as well.
Thank you. So I think I shared all of these links in the chat earlier. So if you missed them, scroll up in the chat. There's links directly to both the House and the Senate bill and AWI's page about the act, and also ALDF, Animal Legal Defense Fund. This map we've shared before, so this is just the map of the United States looking at regulations, where there are currently bans on all primates and where there are bans on some species. And 637, we should probably call it, but I really appreciate everyone who's participated, asked some really great questions, and it's really been, yeah.
I'm Leslie. I just figured I'd introduce myself.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm a little shy, but not shy. I used to volunteer at Save the Chimps, and so I was always a primate person. Then I watched Tiger King, and it opened my mind, my world. I had no idea really what was going on, and I learned a real lot. So what I'm hoping is that with Chimp Crazy, it can open people's mind to what's going on with the primates. I just wanted to say that. And I didn't watch Chimp Crazy, and I don't really want to. But also, just because I heard this, like, just the really sad scenes. I don't want to see that. And then the other thing, there was a comment or a question how we could compel pet owners to give up their pet monkey. What I'm learning with the people that I deal with is that the so-called bad people, you can't go in on them like strong force. You got to kind of work with them. And I don't know if you understand this, but it's like, like if someone comes to me, you're such an idiot. What are you doing to your dog? Blah, blah, blah. I'm going to go on the defensive, and I'm going to be like, I'm not giving you my dog. And then if I don't understand what they're saying, that person needs to help me understand what's going on. So you got to kind of like a little softer, I think, would work better. And then, of course, if it's going on for too long, then you come in hardball and do what you got to do to get the animal. If that makes sense. Do you understand? Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think, with sanctuaries that house primates that were former pets, well, some sanctuaries have started with, primate pet owners who got into it like a monkey was gifted to them, or, they just didn't realize, like most primate pet owners don't realize what they're getting into. And at some point they kind of do, and they don't know what to do. And so I think probably the majority of people who own primates as pets are in that category where they liked primates and they didn't really maybe think too much about it, and then brought them into their homes. And so I totally agree with you. There's no point in vilifying people. And it's also, often not accurate or effective. And I would say that actually the same with laboratories as well. I think a lot of people who work in laboratories are, care for the animals that they're working with and got into it without realizing all the things that were going on. At the same time, I do think that, like the baseball team, there's a role for lots of different perspectives and tactics.
I fully agree with everything you've said, Diana, and I think those are such important points. And I can say from my time at working at numerous sanctuaries, I've known multiple primate species that I've helped care for that were former pets. And the sanctuaries tend to have very good relationships with the people who surrendered those pets. And no one thinks that they're idiots. They are generally kind people who wanted the best for their primates. And there were even a couple who supported the sanctuary and, really became advocates for the sanctuaries where the chimps or other primates that they used to own landed. And I'm so glad you mentioned labs as well, because I think we all, at least those of us in kind of the sanctuary and advocacy world on this call, we probably all know one or two people who started out in a lab who ended up transitioning to either sanctuary or advocacy work. And there's just room to be compassionate towards everyone, for sure.
Thank you. It's so good to hear that. And thank you also for all that you guys do, I wanted to say also. So that's it.
Thank you, Leslie. I
Thanks,
appreciate it.
Leslie. Did we want to try to answer any more questions, or I know it's getting pretty late.
Yeah.
I feel so bad that there's still a couple of
I
questions.
know.
I do have to head out very soon.
Yeah.
I have a dinner invitation from my neighbors, so.
And it is pretty late on the West Coast too. So, or I'm sorry, on the East Coast. Yeah. So I think we should call it, but I apologize that we couldn't get to everything. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, thank you all so much. And thank you very, very much, Debbie and Kate, for joining us and sharing information. It was really valuable.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah,
I'm glad you're not purple anymore, Debbie.
I know. I just
Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right,
Have
bye,
a good night,
everyone.
everyone.
Bye.
Night.
Bye.